Carl Jung once documented something so psychologically disturbing, so deeply unsettling, that he kept the complete findings hidden away for decades. What he uncovered was not merely an academic curiosity, but a revelation about human transformation, so profound it unsettled the very foundation of his beliefs about empathy, resilience, and the hidden architecture of the human psyche. Imagine discovering that the qualities we most admire, the ability to care, to forgive, to endure, could conceal something far more complex than anyone had suspected. Have you ever noticed how the kindest souls often carry the heaviest, invisible burdens? How they apologize for simply existing, all while quietly absorbing the pain and chaos of everyone around them. They give endlessly, sometimes to people who take without hesitation, without conscience. And yet beneath that quiet generosity lies a strength few ever recognize. If you've ever felt underestimated, if others looked at your gentleness and mistook it for weakness, you need to understand what Jung discovered. Because what he found in those moments of research was not weakness at all. It was something far more intricate, far more alarming, and infinitely more terrifying. For over 3 decades at his Zurich clinic, Jung studied patients who arrived broken, exhausted, and weighed down by wounds they couldn't even name. But these were not ordinary cases of depression or anxiety. These were empaths, people who had become, as Jung described, emotional shock absorbers for everyone around them. They carried bruises they explained away, endured chronic exhaustion they blamed on themselves, and showed a haunting, universal tendency to apologize for taking up space in the world. At first, Jung expected to find fractured minds damaged beyond repair by years of mistreatment and abuse. Instead, what he uncovered shook him so deeply that his hands trembled as he wrote his notes. These empaths hadn't been destroyed by their experiences. They had been studying them. With quiet intensity, they had observed, analyzed, and remembered. Jung discovered that every empath he worked with kept an astonishingly detailed mental record of those who had hurt them, not out of bitterness, but with chilling, almost surgical precision. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. It was as if they had mapped entire emotional landscapes with the accuracy of trained psychologists. They understood manipulation tactics better than the manipulators themselves, and still they had never used this knowledge, not once, until the day came when something or someone finally pushed them past their breaking point. In that moment, Jung realized he was not simply treating victims. He was sitting across from what he would later call psychological geniuses in hiding. Their gift was not just the ability to feel deeply, it was the astonishing capacity to process emotional information faster, more accurately, and with more devastating clarity than almost anyone else. Their brains were wired for a kind of pattern recognition in human behavior that most people could barely imagine. What Jung discovered next shocked him even more. These empaths, he realized, possessed what he eventually termed emotional omniscience. They could read the subtlest of micro-expressions, catch the faintest inconsistencies in a voice, and sense energy shifts in a room that others could not consciously perceive. In effect, they were living lie detectors, though tragically many had been gaslit for years into believing their perceptions were unreliable or even delusional. Jung documented case after case where empaths had predicted betrayals long before any tangible evidence appeared, sensed affairs before uncovering proof, and identified manipulative behavior patterns that took him weeks of rigorous professional analysis to confirm. Their uncanny accuracy, he realized, was not mystical at all. It was neurological sophistication operating on levels that pushed the limits of his understanding of human perception. Determined to test this theory, Jung invited colleagues into therapy sessions without giving his empath patients any background information. Within mere minutes, these individuals could identify the strangers, unresolved childhood traumas, unspoken relationship dynamics, and even deep-seated professional insecurities. Their accuracy rate, it consistently exceeded 95%. Jung's blood ran cold when he grasped the implications. These empaths were not psychics, nor were they dreamers lost in intuition. They were observers paying attention at a depth most humans never come close to. What others dismissed as gut feeling was, in truth, advanced data collection filtered through extraordinary sensitivity. But then came the detail that made Jung's hands tremble as he recorded his notes. These empaths had been systematically conditioned to distrust their own perceptions, trained, often since childhood, to believe that what they saw, felt, or understood was false. And who orchestrated this cruel deception? Precisely the people who had the most to fear from their clarity. Narcissists, manipulators, energy vampires, each of them had worked relentlessly to convince these empaths that their gift was a curse. It was here Jung began to see something revolutionary about gaslighting. It isn't simply random cruelty. It is a survival mechanism employed by psychologically primitive people to neutralize those capable of piercing through their deceptions. The empath's accuracy posed a direct threat to the manipulator's carefully constructed illusions, and so society itself, perhaps unconsciously, reinforced the same pattern, teaching empaths again and again that their gift was a liability. Every time they pointed out a lie, a hidden agenda, or a manipulation, they were told they were too sensitive, too dramatic, or overly emotional. Over time, they learned to silence themselves. They doubted their perceptions, apologized for seeing what others refused to see, and carried the weight of truths that no one wanted spoken aloud. But Jung uncovered something that altered the way he thought about the human mind. Truth does not vanish simply because you stop speaking it. It lingers, it builds, it accumulates, and in the lives of these empaths, it had been accumulating for decades. Jung observed, finally, that empaths do not lose their minds from feeling too much. They lose their minds from being told, over and over again, that their feelings are wrong. He realized, with a jolt of clarity, that these patients were not collapsing into nervous breakdowns at all. They were having breakthroughs. And Jung's own breakthrough came when he began documenting what he would call empathic accuracy logs. He instructed his patients to write down their intuitive impressions about people and situations, then carefully track what unfolded over time. The results were nothing short of staggering. Again and again, these empaths proved themselves right about people's hidden motivations, secret behaviors, and true intentions, accurate more than 90% of the time. Yet for years, they had been persuaded that they were simply too sensitive, paranoid, or even imagining things. How could such precise perception be dismissed so easily? The more Jung examined, the clearer it became that he was witnessing a deliberate, systematic campaign of psychological warfare designed to silence the most perceptive members of society. Across dozens of cases, a striking pattern emerged. The transformation didn't occur slowly or gradually. It erupted in a single crystalline moment, one that perfectly reflected what Jung already knew about shadow integration under extreme psychological pressure. The trigger, without exception, was betrayal. But not just any betrayal, it was always from someone the empath had trusted absolutely and protected without hesitation. In case after case, Jung documented the same devastating scenario. The empath uncovered infidelity, financial exploitation, or carefully orchestrated emotional manipulation at the hands of their closest person. What made these experiences soul-crushing was not merely the act of betrayal itself. It was the unbearable realization that they had seen the signs all along and chosen to ignore them. They had betrayed their own intuition in order to preserve the illusion of love. And as empaths always did, they said nothing. They swallowed the pain in silence. They turned the blame inward, convinced themselves it was their fault, and tried even harder to be the perfect partner, the dutiful child, the loyal friend. But then came what Jung called the clarity event. This was the moment when their unmatched pattern recognition finally shattered their need to keep believing the best in others. Most people expected empaths to collapse emotionally in such moments, to cry, to rage, to unravel. Their abusers certainly expected chaos. They were ready with their usual arsenal of gaslighting, guilt, and emotional control. What happened instead was far more unsettling. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung identified this as the precise moment when analytical brilliance fused with emotional depth, when someone integrated their rational perception with their emotional intelligence. It was here, in this terrifying calm, that the true transformation began. What Jung observed next challenged everything he thought he knew about human psychology. These empaths did not merely speak truth, they became living truth. Their entire presence shifted into what he described as integrated authenticity. They stopped performing for others. They stopped people-pleasing. They stopped apologizing for existing. In that moment, they became immovable forces of clarity. Jung watched closely as these individuals began to develop what he would later term psychological sovereignty, a state of complete ownership over their emotional and mental reality. They no longer sought external validation because they had reached something far deeper, a sense of internal completion. This wasn't arrogance, and it certainly wasn't narcissism. It was self-actualization in its highest form. These empaths did not lash out, they did not rage, they did not scheme for revenge. Instead, they simply began to speak truth. They revealed with calm precision everything they had seen, recorded, and silently endured for years. Their words were not cruel. They carried no unnecessary venom. Rather, they resembled the deliberate incisions of a surgeon, identifying each diseased organ before removing it. What unfolded was not an act of vengeance. It was clarity in its purest expression. At last, these empaths were using their extraordinary gift of perception not to excuse destructive behavior, but to expose it. Jung realized that this process was not about retaliation. It was something far more profound. It was shadow integration happening in real time, the moment when a person stops denying the very parts of themselves they had been conditioned to suppress. The empath's shadow was never evil. It was their buried intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. When these hidden aspects were finally reintegrated, something irreversible occurred. They became what Jung called psychologically complete. And here was the part that disturbed him most. The transformation was permanent. These patients did not fall back into their old habits of people-pleasing. They no longer apologized for their boundaries. They no longer second-guessed their perceptions. They had become what Jung feared most, empaths who could no longer be manipulated. To capture this process, he developed what he named the Integration Observation Protocol, identifying 3 distinct phases that every transformed empath appeared to experience. The first was the recognition stage. In this stage, empaths learn to identify their suppressed shadow aspects, not just their anger, but also their intelligence, their inner strength, and their absolute right to boundaries. They stopped pathologizing their perceptions, recognizing instead that their emotional sensitivity was not fragility, but a sophisticated data processing system in its own right. Then came the integration stage, which proved the most intense. Here, Jung observed empaths merging their light and shadow into what he described as the complete self. They became people capable of extraordinary kindness toward those who deserved it, and ruthless precision with those who did not. Finally came the application stage, the phase Jung found most fascinating. Integrated empaths learn to apply their emotional intelligence not only as a shield for defense, but as a tool for strategy. They became what he called psychological architects, individuals who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Jung realized that these transformed empaths could no longer be victimized, because they now saw manipulation coming from miles away and dismantled it before it ever had the chance to take root. They didn't just heal themselves, they developed immunity to psychological abuse while still preserving their extraordinary capacity for genuine love and authentic human connection. What fascinated Jung most was how these empaths developed what he called emotional aikido, the remarkable ability to redirect negative energy without absorbing it. When confronted with attempts at manipulation, they did not react with chaos or collapse. Instead, they stayed centered, poised, and redirected the energy back to its source with almost surgical precision. Jung documented one particularly striking case involving a patient he referred to as Sarah M. After her integration, Sarah's narcissistic mother attempted her usual guilt-driven manipulation during a family gathering. For decades, Sarah had absorbed that toxic energy, blaming herself and carrying the emotional weight. But now, she simply looked at her mother and said calmly, "I can see you're in pain, and I choose not to participate in this dynamic." Then, without raising her voice, she stood up and walked away. The effect was immediate. Her mother was left stunned, suddenly realizing that her primary emotional supply had vanished. For the first time in their entire relationship, she was forced to confront her own behavior without Sarah shielding her from the consequences. Jung noted that Sarah had not become cold, vindictive, or detached from love. Quite the opposite. She had developed what he described as compassionate detachment, the ability to continue loving someone while refusing to enable their dysfunction. It was, Jung believed, a level of psychological maturity that most people never attain in their lifetime. But he also observed something even more profound. These integrated empaths began to attract entirely different kinds of people into their lives. Their new energy signature, what Jung referred to as integrated authenticity, seemed to repel emotional predators and energy vampires, while at the same time drawing in psychologically healthy, conscious individuals. Jung wrote extensively about this process, which he termed the frequency shift. He believed that when empaths stop operating from wounds and begin operating from wisdom, they literally vibrate at a different psychological frequency. And at that frequency, unconscious or manipulative people cannot sustain a relationship with them. It was not the empaths who forced these separations. Their authentic presence itself became the filter. He documented how one patient experienced this phenomenon after full integration. Within only 6 months, the man's circle of friends had completely transformed. Toxic colleagues and opportunistic acquaintances seemed to drift away, making excuses to avoid him, while new, healthier individuals began to gravitate toward his life. Jung concluded that he was witnessing nothing less than a form of natural selection operating at the level of consciousness. Integrated empaths, he realized, no longer needed to struggle to filter their relationships. Their presence, their energy, their truth did the filtering for them. Jung spent considerable time studying what he eventually called the frequency phenomenon. He observed that integrated empaths operated what he described as high vibration authenticity, a psychological state that naturally repelled deception while attracting consciousness. Jung documented how this remarkable shift seemed to happen automatically. Manipulative people, who once thrived on exploiting others, now found themselves inexplicably uncomfortable in the presence of integrated empaths. They couldn't quite explain it, but something about these individuals made their usual tactics feel suddenly transparent, weak, and ineffective. Meanwhile, emotionally healthy people experienced the opposite reaction. They felt uplifted, energized, and inspired simply by being near these empaths. Jung realized this had nothing to do with mysticism. It was entirely psychological. Integrated empaths had become so deeply grounded in truth that falsehoods could no longer survive in their presence. Around them, deception and pretense simply dissolved, as though exposed to a bright, unrelenting light. Jung described this phenomenon as authenticity fields, environments that naturally stripped away illusions and demanded honesty. Within these spaces, the masks people wore slipped off almost involuntarily. He also observed that these empaths had become what he called selectively empathetic. They were still deeply caring, still capable of profound compassion, but now they were strategically protective of where and to whom that care flowed. They had come to realize that their empathy was not an endless resource to be scattered everywhere. It was sacred. It had to be respected. It had to be earned. This selective empathy, Jung noted, was not coldness. It was maturity. A new form of psychological clarity had emerged. These empaths had learned to discern the difference between people who were genuinely struggling and those who were addicted to struggle, between those who sought true healing and those who merely sought endless enablement. The most disturbing part, for Jung, was how the mere presence of these transformed empaths affected others. People who had once walked over them effortlessly now felt uneasy, even nervous, in their company. They could not explain why. These empaths were not aggressive, they were not cruel, and yet everyone could sense, on some unspoken level, that something fundamental had changed. Jung recorded how manipulative individuals often attempted what he termed regression testing, trying to pull integrated empaths back into old patterns through guilt, shame, or emotional baiting. But when these tactics failed, manipulators often grew frustrated and, in that frustration, revealed their true nature for everyone to see. The integrated empaths, however, remained completely unmoved. They had cultivated what Jung called emotional immunity, the ability to witness manipulation, understand its intent, and yet remain entirely unaffected by it. They could see the behavior, name its purpose in their minds, and simply refuse to engage. Jung also identified what he referred to as the predator's instinct. Manipulative people seemed to instinctively recognize when their usual tactics would no longer work. They began to avoid integrated empaths the way vampires avoid sunlight, recoiling from the quiet strength they carried. Jung even wrote, "The awakened empath does not need to announce their power, others can feel it in their bones." And these transformations, Jung stressed, did not occur in isolation. He documented how the ripple effects of these changes spread outward, altering every social system, every relationship, and every environment that the awakened empaths had once been part of. Family dynamics collapsed, not because these individuals tore them apart, but because they simply stopped enabling dysfunction. Jung documented several cases where integrated empaths were accused by their own family members of changing or becoming cold. In truth, nothing of the sort had happened. What had changed was their willingness to serve as emotional sponges. They no longer volunteered to absorb everyone else's chaos, guilt, and unresolved pain. Jung observed that in some families, this shift eventually led to genuine growth. Relatives began to evolve in response to the empath's firm but healthy boundaries. Others, however, chose distance rather than the discomfort of self-examination. Yet in every case, the integrated empath remained centered, calm, and resolute about their choices. This led Jung to describe what he called the empath's mirror effect. Transformed empaths did not need to confront dysfunction directly. Their very presence reflected people's unresolved issues back at them with an almost unbearable clarity. Manipulators found it intolerable. Around these empaths, they felt exposed, seen through, stripped of their psychological disguises and unable to play their usual games. The mirror effect was not something these individuals consciously created. Jung realized it was the natural result of integrated authenticity. When a person stops hiding from themselves, they generate an atmosphere where others find it nearly impossible to hide either. One striking case involved a man Jung referred to as Patient T, who worked in a highly competitive corporate environment. After his integration, his mere presence in meetings altered the behavior of everyone around him. Colleagues who had once thrived on backstabbing and subtle manipulation suddenly stopped when he was in the room. Not because he confronted them, but because their behavior felt too transparent, too exposed to continue. Jung noted carefully that Patient T had not become judgmental or self-righteous. Instead, he simply embodied integrated awareness, a state of seeing everything clearly without feeling compelled to control or fix it. This quality created profound safety for authentic individuals while simultaneously making inauthentic behavior impossible to sustain. Those who sought honesty felt safe around him for the first time. Those who thrived on deceit could not endure his presence. Jung's research showed that awakened empaths had become living truth detectors, not by casting judgment, but simply through the integrity of their presence. He spent years studying this phenomenon and eventually developed what he called the authenticity resonance theory. He concluded that people naturally align themselves with the dominant psychological frequency in any environment. When an integrated empath entered a space, their authentic presence became that dominant frequency. This in turn created what Jung described as spontaneous healing environments. In these spaces, people who had been hiding behind masks suddenly felt permission to be authentic. The integrated empath did not have to act, intervene, or perform. Their presence alone was enough to facilitate healing. But the most disturbing discovery came when Jung introduced these transformed patients to others in his practice. Within minutes, they could identify core psychological wounds and even point to the exact type of therapy that was needed. Jung realized these empaths' diagnostic accuracy surpassed even his own decades of training. Intrigued, he began conducting what he called intuitive assessment experiments. He would invite integrated empaths to observe new patients briefly, sometimes only for a few minutes, then compare their insights with his professional evaluations. The results were astonishing. Their accuracy was almost supernatural. Without access to clinical files, these individuals could identify childhood trauma patterns, attachment styles, and core psychological wounds with startling precision, as if they were reading directly from a hidden record no one else could see. Jung soon realized these individuals had developed something akin to psychological X-ray vision. But what he discovered next was even more remarkable. These empaths could not only diagnose patterns, they could also predict future behavior with uncanny accuracy. They would describe in detail how a patient might respond to different therapeutic approaches, which defense mechanisms would rise under stress, and even what types of relationships each individual would inevitably attract. How could anyone explain such insight without acknowledging it as a form of advanced perception? To test this predictive ability systematically, Jung designed controlled experiments. He asked empaths to observe patients for only a few minutes, and then make forecasts about their psychological development. The data stunned him. Over 85% of their predictions proved accurate, often more so than trained clinicians working with years of case history. Over the following months and years, Jung came to realize that he was documenting something that challenged the very foundations of psychology as a discipline. These empaths had, through survival necessity, developed diagnostic and predictive abilities that exceeded formal psychological training. They had become, in Jung's words, natural psychological scientists. He began to understand that every empath potentially carried this profound level of insight, but only integrated empaths had learned to trust their perceptions completely. And that complete trust was the key. Without it, their abilities remained dormant, clouded by self-doubt. With it, their accuracy became extraordinary. This realization created an ethical dilemma that haunted Jung for years. If empaths could naturally develop this level of psychological insight through trauma and integration, what did that mean for the future of psychology itself? Would the profession, built on decades of formal education, one day have to acknowledge the legitimacy of those who had never studied textbooks but had lived the raw experiences that shaped them into healers? Jung realized he was witnessing the emergence of what he called natural psychologists, individuals whose lived experiences had forced them to develop therapeutic-level insights, refined not in classrooms, but in the crucible of survival. These empaths could read people's patterns, anticipate their reactions, and even facilitate healing with remarkable skill. Yet Jung also recognized the shadows within this gift. An empath with such deep insight could, if they chose, manipulate others just as easily as they could help them. They could identify vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. The ethical implications kept Jung awake at night. He began to see empathic sensitivity not as a disorder to be cured, but as a psychological capability, one that demanded both understanding and protection. At the same time, he could not ignore a troubling truth. In the wrong circumstances, these extraordinary abilities could be devastating. An empath who integrated their shadow without proper ethical grounding could become extremely manipulative. Jung knew the danger was real, and so he devoted months to developing what he eventually called the ethical integration framework. His observations revealed that authentic shadow integration, when carried out correctly, naturally included ethical expansion. When empaths truly integrated their shadow, they did not turn cruel or vindictive. Instead, they became more compassionate, more capable of balancing clarity with care. This transformation occurred because integration forced individuals to confront their own capacity for darkness. They could no longer deny that within themselves existed the potential to manipulate, to deceive, even to cause harm. But rather than embracing these darker capacities, they chose to transmute them into a form of protective strength. Jung described how integrated empaths developed what he termed fierce compassion, the remarkable ability to be ruthlessly kind. They learned to say no with love, to refuse enabling destructive behavior while still holding genuine care for the person behind the actions. They mastered the crucial skill of separating the individual from their behaviors, understanding that rejecting manipulation did not mean rejecting the human being. To ensure this transformation unfolded safely, Jung designed conscious integration protocols, structured processes meant to guide empaths step by step. His protocols emphasized 3 stages: awareness, acceptance, and application. First came awareness, helping empaths recognize their suppressed shadow aspects. Next was acceptance, acknowledging these traits not as flaws to be destroyed, but as natural parts of human wholeness. Finally, the application stage, learning to channel integrated power into healing and protection rather than harm. Over several years, Jung tested these protocols with dozens of patients. The results were nothing short of remarkable. Empaths who underwent conscious integration developed the same kind of psychological immunity as those who had been transformed by traumatic betrayal, but without enduring the devastating emotional collapse that usually served as the trigger. Jung realized something profound. Shadow integration did not have to wait for the breaking point. It could be achieved through conscious choice and guided process, long before a person was shattered by crisis. This insight changed everything. It meant empaths could reclaim their power before they were broken. And the conscious integration method proved so effective that Jung launched what he called the Zurich Empathic Integration Study, a groundbreaking multi-year research project that tracked empaths through intentional, guided transformation. The results revolutionized his understanding of human potential. Conscious integration not only prevented the catastrophic trauma that traditionally awakened empaths, it also produced transformations that were more stable, more sustainable, and less volatile. Those who chose integration deliberately were able to maintain healthier relationships, experience less psychological turbulence, and develop balanced access to their heightened abilities. Jung ultimately documented how these consciously integrated empaths became what he described as evolutionary bridges, individuals who could guide others through transformation without waiting for crisis to do the work. They represented not only survivors of their own sensitivity, but pioneers of a new psychological path, able to carry others across the threshold of awakening with clarity and compassion. Jung's final notes on these cases reveal something beautiful. These individuals lived the rest of their lives as what he described as balanced warriors, beings who embody both strength and tenderness in a way that seemed almost paradoxical at first glance. People capable of incredible gentleness with those who had truly earned it, yet displaying implacable strength when confronted by those who threatened it. Jung wrote extensively about how these balanced warriors moved through the world with what he called conscious sovereignty. They no longer made decisions out of fear or to meet the expectations of others. Instead, every choice arose from their own deeply anchored values. They began choosing relationships that nourished them rather than drained them, and in doing so, they redefined what authentic human connection looked like. Most importantly, they maintained open-hearted boundaries. This was no small achievement. It meant they could remain fully present and emotionally available for genuine connection, yet completely inaccessible to manipulation. They had learned the rare art of loving without losing themselves, of giving without being consumed. Jung studied these transformed individuals over decades, tracking their development across the arc of their lives. What he found was extraordinary. Not a single integrated empath ever reverted to the old patterns of unconscious absorption that once left them vulnerable to exploitation. The transformation, Jung concluded, was permanent. These individuals didn't simply stabilize, they continued evolving layer by layer, year after year. Their shadow integration became a foundation stone for ongoing psychological development. They emerged as lifetime learners of consciousness, ever curious, ever deepening, ever expanding. Jung observed that many of these integrated empaths naturally stepped into the role of mentors, offering guidance to other sensitive individuals still lost in cycles of doubt and gaslighting. They created what he called consciousness networks, communities of psychologically mature people committed to supporting each other's ongoing evolution. Over time, these networks became templates for what Jung believed might represent humanity's next evolutionary step. Imagine it. People who could feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without descending into cynicism, and love deeply without losing themselves in the process. To Jung, this was not theory but living evidence. His last observations, written near the end of his career, reflected the clarity of a man who had devoted his life to studying the human psyche. He concluded that the empath's true journey was never from sensitivity to numbness. It was from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They became not less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic. Now, if you recognize yourself in this research, Jung's words carry a challenge. You are standing before what he called the most important choice in human psychological development. You can wait for life to force this transformation upon you through the crucible of ultimate betrayal, or you can begin conscious integration now, choosing the path deliberately before crisis strikes. Jung's research revealed a striking pattern. Most empaths, when pushed to their absolute breaking point, instinctively chose integration. And when they did, something remarkable happened. They did not become cruel. They became precise. They did not lose their hearts. They gained backbones. The transformed empath, Jung wrote, becomes what he called love with boundaries. Someone capable of caring deeply while simultaneously protecting themselves. Someone who understands that compassion without limits is not compassion at all. It is self-erasure. Absolutely. Jung's final conclusion was clear. This transformation does not have to wait for rock bottom. The choice is available now for those who dare to step into their full power. Through his conscious integration protocols, empaths could begin this journey while they still had their strength and hope intact. Jung's methods offered a way to choose transformation deliberately before betrayal or breakdown forced it upon you. A roadmap for reclaiming power without losing heart. How do you know if you're ready for conscious transformation? Ask yourself, do you constantly absorb other people's emotions until you can't tell your feelings from theirs? Do you excuse or explain away red flags just to keep the peace, even while your intuition screams warnings? Do you habitually apologize for your needs while meeting everyone else's demands without question? Do social encounters, especially with certain people, leave you drained, muddled, and confused? Do you find yourself making excuses for other people's bad behavior while being hypercritical of your own mistakes? Do you struggle to say no even when saying yes feels like betraying yourself? These are not character flaws, and they do not mean you are weak. They are indicators that you possess the advanced emotional processing capabilities Jung identified, but you haven't yet learned to direct them consciously. In Jung's terms, you may be operating from unconscious empathy, feeling everything without choosing anything. To help empaths strengthen perceptual trust, Jung developed a series of practical exercises that could be started immediately. The first was intuition journaling. Record your gut impressions about people and situations, then track outcomes over time. Jung found that those who practiced this daily for 30 days began to trust their perceptions at a deeper, more reliable level. The second exercise was boundary experimentation. Start with small, clear boundaries and observe how people respond. Many empaths are shocked to discover how rarely others respect their limits, and yet, perhaps surprisingly, psychologically healthy people prefer relationships with clear boundaries. The third exercise was shadow dialogue, a guided practice of consciously connecting with suppressed parts of yourself. Jung led patients through conversations with their shadow, helping them reframe suppressed anger as information, denied power as protection, and silenced intuition as wisdom. These practices are not about becoming harsh. They are about reclaiming lost internal authority and learning to apply it ethically. For Jung, the path to integration always began with what he called perceptual validation, learning to trust your intuitions completely. That inexplicable gut feeling about someone, the sense that something doesn't add up, though everything looks fine on paper, the quiet alarm that someone is lying even when you lack proof. These are not delusions. Jung's work demonstrated that you are almost certainly right. Your empathic nervous system is picking up micro-expressions, subtle energy shifts, and behavioral inconsistencies your conscious mind has not yet processed. You are not imagining things. You're not paranoid. You're not too sensitive. You are reading data that most people miss entirely. Stop gaslighting yourself. Stop explaining away your discomfort. Stop minimizing your perceptions. just to keep others comfortable. Instead, start honoring the sophisticated emotional intelligence that has always been working to protect you. Your sensitivity has never been your weakness. It is, in fact, your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it consciously, with clarity and confidence, is the day you step into a form of power most people will never understand. But Jung emphasized repeatedly that this power is not about domination, nor is it about revenge against those who once hurt you. True power, according to his research, lies in becoming someone who can no longer be victimized while still maintaining the rare capacity for authentic love. It is not dangerous to innocent people. It is dangerous only to those who would exploit your gift. Imagine the strength of standing unshaken in the presence of manipulation, yet still able to extend kindness to those who are genuine. Jung's most important discovery was that integrated empaths don't become less loving. Quite the opposite. They become more discerning about where their love flows. They learn that unconditional love without boundaries does not heal dysfunction. It only enables it to grow. True love, Jung concluded, requires standards. The fully integrated empath develops what he described as appropriate response. They become capable of being soft with those who have earned tenderness, yet sharp and unwavering with those who demand firmness. In this, they master the art of meeting people exactly where they are, without ever losing themselves in the process. Jung's research left us with a sobering truth. The empath's greatest tragedy isn't their sensitivity. It's how long they wait before honoring it properly. For every empath, there will come a transformation moment, a betrayal so profound it forces them to choose, remain a victim or step into sovereignty. Yet Jung's conscious integration protocols revealed another path. You don't have to wait for ultimate betrayal to begin this journey. You can choose integration while you still carry your strength, your hope, and your faith in yourself intact. The choice is available before the breaking point. The question then isn't whether the empath will transform. Jung's research showed that integration is inevitable for anyone with authentic empathic capabilities. The only real question is whether you will direct that transformation consciously or allow life to force it upon you through crisis. Jung spent decades studying patients who appeared gentle, even broken, until something inside them finally snapped. His research proved something extraordinary. The empath's journey was never about becoming less sensitive. It was always about becoming consciously sensitive. And it is consciousness, Jung realized, that transforms victims into forces of nature. The most beautiful part of his findings was this: transformed empaths never lost their capacity for love. They simply learned to love themselves as fiercely as they had once loved others. Jung documented this phenomenon and gave it a name. He called it the Great Rebalancing. For years, these empaths had poured almost all of their energy outward, tending to others, offering comfort, and carrying emotional burdens that were not their own, while quietly neglecting their own wounds. The integration process, however, forced them to reverse that long-standing pattern. It required them to turn that same loving energy inward, practicing what Jung termed necessary self-compassion. This was not indulgence, it was survival, balance, and ultimately transformation. Jung observed that this rebalancing did not make empaths selfish or cold, as many might fear. Instead, it made them far more effective at loving others authentically. After all, when you are no longer desperate for external validation, you can offer love freely without strings attached. When you are not depleted by your own unmet needs, you finally have genuine energy to share with the world. Isn't that a more sustainable way to love? Jung noted with great care that integrated empaths often became the most generous people in their communities, but their generosity no longer came from emptiness or exhaustion. It came from overflow, from an inner well that had been restored. If you are an empath reading this, remember Jung's essential discovery. Your sensitivity isn't your weakness. It is your evolutionary advantage. Time and again he observed that the kindest people often became the strongest people, because kindness without strength enables the very dysfunction it seeks to heal, while kindness rooted in strength transforms it. Jung realized that empaths, whether they recognized it or not, serve a collective psychological function. In every human system, families, groups, societies, empaths naturally emerge as emotional regulators. This role is not a burden, though many experience it that way. It is a calling. Yet Jung insisted it must be approached consciously, otherwise it risks becoming destructive. He discovered that when empaths integrate their shadow, they do not abandon their empathic nature. They evolve it. They become what he described as sacred empaths, individuals who can hold space for collective healing while still maintaining their psychological sovereignty. And these sacred empaths develop what Jung called transmutational empathy. Instead of unconsciously absorbing the pain of others until it consumes them, they learn to feel it, understand it, and then transform it through integrated consciousness. They become, in essence, alchemists of human suffering. Jung observed that this rare transmutational ability often manifested outwardly as extraordinary healing gifts. Integrated empaths became therapists, teachers, artists, and leaders who inspired transformation simply by embodying it. Importantly, they didn't fix people in the traditional sense. Rather, they created environments of safety, truth, and authenticity where others could begin to heal themselves. When empaths finally integrate their shadow, embracing their suppressed intelligence, reclaiming their denied boundaries, and awakening their silenced intuition, they become what Jung referred to as forces of nature, not violent, not cruel, but utterly unshakable. People who can walk into chaos and remain steady, people whose very presence inspires others to confront their own truth. Jung spent considerable time studying what made these integrated empaths so psychologically powerful. Through decades of research, he identified several key characteristics that set them apart from their peers. First among them was emotional omniscience, the uncanny ability to read psychological patterns with almost supernatural accuracy. But here was the difference. Unlike unconscious empaths who felt everything chaotically, drowning in the emotions of others, integrated empaths could process emotional information with clarity and precision, all while maintaining complete emotional regulation. Second, they developed what Jung described as selective permeability, the remarkable ability to consciously choose what emotions to absorb and which to deflect. No longer at the mercy of every emotional current around them, they could open their empathic channels fully when engaging in healing work and just as deliberately close them for protection. Imagine the strength it takes to feel so deeply yet remain sovereign over what enters your inner world. Third, integrated empaths exhibited what Jung called paradoxical presence. They could embody a rare balance, being simultaneously available and unavailable. They were fully present for authentic connection, radiating warmth and openness to those who approached with honesty. Yet at the very same time, they were utterly inaccessible to manipulation. This dual quality baffled manipulators who found their usual strategies useless, while comforting those who sought real connection. Jung carefully documented how these unique characteristics made integrated empaths extraordinarily effective in nearly every area of life. They were not merely surviving. They became evolutionary catalysts, individuals whose very presence seemed to accelerate the psychological development of everyone around them. People found themselves behaving differently in their company, as though drawn into a higher standard of authenticity without even realizing it. Jung's case studies revealed something even more compelling. Integrated empaths often became what he termed unconscious teachers. They rarely needed to lecture or explain their transformation. Instead, they modeled healthy boundaries through their actions, showing others how to love deeply without losing themselves. Their integrated presence spoke volumes, a silent testimony that real change was possible. In these individuals, Jung saw a glimpse of humanity's psychological future. They represented what he believed was the next stage of human evolution. Individuals who could hold both compassion and discernment, both openness and protection, both love and limits. The awakened empath stood as living proof of Jung's most profound truth. Within every wound lies the seed of transcendence, and within every betrayal lives an invitation to become whole. Jung came to realize that the empath's journey through shadow integration was not just a personal triumph. It represented a species-level leap in psychological evolution, humanity's movement toward higher consciousness. He believed empaths were evolutionary pioneers, developing psychological capabilities that would one day become more widespread. The ability to process emotional information with depth, the capacity for empathy paired with unshakable boundaries, and the skill of reading psychological patterns with astonishing accuracy. These traits, he argued, were not anomalies. They were previews of humanity's future. Case after case reinforced this conclusion. Integrated empaths consistently became beacon lights in their communities, embodying the living possibility of transformation. They proved that healing was not merely possible, but in Jung's view, inevitable for those willing to face their shadow. His most profound discovery came in the final years of his research. Integrated empaths were not only healing themselves, they were healing the collective unconscious. Each individual transformation, Jung realized, created what he called morphic resonance, a kind of psychological field effect that made integration and healing more accessible for other empaths. He observed how those who had undergone integration often found other empaths naturally drawn to them, not through unhealthy dependence, but through what Jung termed resonant recognition, the deep, unspoken acknowledgement between souls who had walked similar paths and survived. These integrated empaths then became natural teachers, mentors, and guides. And their very existence created what Jung described as healing networks throughout society, webs of connection where authentic growth could flourish. And through these networks, the ripple of transformation spread far beyond the individual, touching the collective itself. They were living proof that the empath's journey from victim to sovereign was not only possible, but in fact represented what Jung believed to be humanity's evolutionary destiny. This, he declared, is the psychology of the awakened empath, And once you truly grasp it, you will never again underestimate the quiet yet unshakable strength of someone who has turned their pain into power, their wounds into wisdom, and their deepest suffering into their greatest source of resilience. Jung's final insight, recorded near the end of his long career, captures the very essence of his decades of research into empathic transformation. The empath who has integrated their shadow does not simply survive, they become a living bridge between the world of feeling and the world of wisdom. They are proof that sensitivity and strength are not opposites, but partners in the profound dance of conscious evolution. After all, the world does not need more broken empaths drowning in the weight of other people's pain. What it desperately needs are awakened ones, individuals strong enough to hold space for collective healing while fiercely maintaining their own sovereignty. And Jung's body of research demonstrates something extraordinary, that this transformation is not merely a rare miracle. It is, in fact, the natural outcome of consciousness applied to suffering. This is why he left us with one final, unforgettable understanding. Every empath, without exception, carries within them the potential to become what he called wounded healers, individuals whose very transformation becomes a profound gift to the collective. Their journey from victim to sovereign, from unconscious absorption to conscious choice, from endless people-pleasing to authentic love, represents not just a personal path, but the trajectory that all of humanity is slowly, inevitably walking. The empath will transform, Jung's research makes this abundantly clear. The only real question is whether that transformation will be chosen consciously, or whether it will be forced upon them through crisis and ultimate betrayal. The choice, Jung emphasized, is always yours. Choose conscious transformation. Choose integration. Choose to become the balanced warrior Jung documented so meticulously. Become someone who can feel everything, yet also choose everything with clarity, sovereignty, and complete awareness. Because, as he saw it, this world does not need more passivity. It needs more empaths who know their worth, who trust their perceptions, and who refuse to dim their light for the sake of anyone's comfort. These empaths understand that their sensitivity is not a weakness to be hidden in shame, but a superpower to be wielded with precision and with love. The very day you stop apologizing for your depth is the day you step into your true power. And Jung's research promises this. Once awakened, that power can never be taken away again. Jung devoted his life to studying the mysteries of the human psyche. Yet his work with empaths revealed something far beyond psychology. It uncovered the sacred nature of transformation itself. He came to see that the empath's journey is not only a process of personal healing, but also an act of collective service, not merely an instance of individual growth, but an evolutionary contribution to humanity's future. In his private journals, Jung wrote with striking clarity, "The empath who has integrated their shadow becomes a lighthouse in the storm of human unconsciousness. They do not fight the darkness, they become the light that makes darkness visible and therefore transformable." These words were not poetic exaggeration, but the distilled truth of decades of research. And this, Jung insisted, is your invitation, if you are ready to receive it. It is not an invitation to become someone else, not a call to reinvent yourself or deny your nature. Instead, it is a summons to become who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the wounds and the fears that taught you to shrink, It is a call to step fully into the brilliance of your empathic gifts without being consumed or lost in the endless demands of others. It means learning to love fiercely, but also with unshakable boundaries. To feel deeply, yes, but to choose consciously where and how those feelings flow. Can you imagine the difference it makes when compassion is not desperation, but a choice born of strength? Jung's findings reveal that the world itself is waiting for this light. Your transformation is not only healing for you, it radiates outward, touching everyone whose life intersects with yours. The journey from broken empath to integrated warrior creates ripples of consciousness that extend far beyond what you will ever see. A single empath choosing integration, Jung discovered, can alter the emotional climate of an entire family, a workplace, even a community. So choose transformation, choose integration, choose to trust the wisdom Jung documented in case after case, that within your greatest sensitivity lies your greatest strength, and within your deepest wounds rests your most powerful gift to the world. If this message stirs something in your soul, do not ignore it. Let it be the signal that you are ready to begin. Declare it out loud or write it down in the comments. I choose conscious transformation. If you are ready to walk the path of integration like the empaths Jung documented so carefully, stay connected, subscribe for more revelations about the hidden psychology of human transformation. And do more than keep it to yourself. Share this message with someone who still believes empathy is weakness. Help them see what Jung proved, that empathy, when wielded consciously, is in fact humanity's greatest strength. And above all, remember, your sensitivity is not your curse. It is your sacred calling, the thread of light you carry into a darkened world.
To honor it is to help heal not only yourself, but humanity, one conscious choice at a time.